So, as I'm sure you will all know, Paramount is desperate to sell itself off to Skydance, and it's doing any and everything it can to make that happen, including to expedite the surrender of CBS by some form of settlement to the White House. Because, well, the Trump administration has pretty much been drilling down on this deal specifically, and anything like this lawsuit between Trump and Paramount is going to nix the deal. So they've gone through an extra step to help take some of the hesitancy out of the administration to let this deal progress forward as normal. Let's dive into it. Here we go. Now, before we get started, if you're here and you look down and you're not subscribed, fix that, please. I'm just kidding, but I would really appreciate the subscription. It will allow me to grow to 100K by the end of 2025, and I desperately need to do that. But let's jump forward into something else. Let's jump into what's actually inspiring this particular video. You see, Deadline just dropped a story on February 26th of 2025. It's a Wednesday, and you may be watching it on Wednesday or Thursday, but regardless, this is important since Paramount Global wants the Trump administration to know that it has dropped its DEI directives, or at least changed them a bit. And I would say it's more likely just to change. They're hiding it underneath the carpet on the hopes that that will help smooth things over and bring the carpet flush with the floor. We'll have to see, but let's get into it. In a memo to staff today, Paramount Global's co-CEOs George Cheeks and Chris McCarthy and Brian Robbins advised on changes in the way the company approaches inclusion moving forward. The latest to capitulate to the Trump administration's attempt to roll back DEI. As a result, some of our policies must change to comply with these new mandates. Well, if they ever want to work with the government again, for sure. Following Disney and companies in media, tech, and across industries, the diversity, equity, and inclusion metric in the short-term incentive plan will have to disappear. This means that they can't tie anything to any of that for fear of drawing the wrath of, well, the Trump administration. So, as of this point right now, it will no longer measure success in progress of company wide DEI initiatives, including aspirational representation goals, the executives wrote. They continued that the incentives will now be based on workforce culture development, qualitative metric that focused on building a high performing and inclusive culture. See, they can't get rid of that word, including through developing leadership and engaging our workforce. The execs assured that we continue to welcome talent of all backgrounds. Now, we're going to take a look at the memo in full and see just exactly what all that gobbledygook meant. To mark the close of 2024, we wanted to update you on certain policy changes we are making. As you may be aware, the current administration's executive order, a Supreme Court decision, and federal mandates require changes in the way the company approaches inclusion moving forward. As a result, some of our policies must change to comply with these new mandates, including staffing goals. We will no longer set or use aspirational numerical goals related to the race, ethnicity, sex, or gender of hires. We continue to welcome talent of all backgrounds. Well, duh. Gender and diversity data. We have ended our policy of collecting race, ethnicity, sex, or gender data for U.S. job applicants on our forms and careers page, except in those markets that legally require us to do so, which we'll see if they're able to maintain that standard after what the Supreme Court has already rendered when it comes to this kind of information. I imagine that in the future, this will fall into some different kind of HIPAA category that basically they can't even ask. In addition, we've eliminated the diversity, equity, and inclusion qualitative metric in our short-term incentive plan for qualified participants. This metric directly connected 5% of funding for our STIP program to the company's success in progress on company-wide DEI initiatives, including aspirational representation goals. We now base 10% of STIP funding on our workforce culture and qualitative metric, which is focused on building a high-performing and inclusive culture, including through developing leadership and engaging our workforce. In other words, You can see here lots of weaseling going on. This stuff's still going to happen. It's just going to be done under a different guise until it's actually found out through study that they basically have changed nothing at all, which, again, for their sake, I hope they don't try to do. With our business objectives firmly in mind, we will continue to evaluate our programs and approach to ensure that we are widening our aperture to attract talent from all geographies, backgrounds, and perspectives, which means you just hire organically. That may mean expanding existing programs while ending others. Well, you're going to need to end a bunch of them that are incredibly racist. As our policies continue to evolve in the future, we will be sure to share those updates with you. Well, for as long as you are co-CEOs, because I imagine once we've eclipsed the deal point where you actually are now owned outright by Skydance, none of that's going to matter because you're probably going to be gone. I'm sorry about that. Not really. To be the best storytellers and continue to drive success, we must have a highly talented, dedicated, and creative workforce that reflects the perspectives and experiences of our many different audiences. Well, you just have one giant audience. You don't need to segment them up that way outside of what demographics would demand. Values like inclusivity, that's not a value, that's a buzzword for communism, and collaboration are part of the Paramount culture and will continue to be. Best, George, Chris, and Brian. Oh, how informal of you. And if you believe any of those words strung together mean that they're quitting DEI, well, I have a bridge to sell you. And I'm not sure that the Trump administration is going to buy. Because again, all of those words that are still supposedly DEI are still in there. At least they didn't add belonging, which would have shown us the massive shift that they were taking to bridge. Once again, this is Hollywood. Paramount is infested with all of those like-minded sycophants that want the world to be under neo-Marxist authoritarian rule. At least that's the ultimate goal, and if they don't see that coming, I don't know how to help them. And again, once their goal is achieved, they won't need entertainers anymore, at least not in the way that they do now, to try to distract while they usher in this new world order. But I don't think that's ultimately the concern here for Paramount. They're trying to keep this deal on track with Skydance, and if they have to pay billions of dollars in settlement, I think they're going to. And if the Trump administration doesn't see any real change, I don't think this deal goes through. And I'm not sure that's entirely a bad thing. CBS may legitimately be on the edge of losing their broadcast license, which means they would only be able to exist outside of that window, which I'm not sure there's an appetite for. But they will immediately lose access to the broadcast and linear audiences that they currently enjoy. And as entities, those individual stations on those individual transponders or broadcast nodes will be all over. And all because CBS wanted to use its news division as a cudgel against the American populace with their spewing of propaganda, their editing of material for the purposes of misinformation, disinformation, or just call it what it is, outright lies about a presidential candidate that can't string a full sentence together. Or at least former candidate? I don't know. What do you call word salad lady? Future California governor? Hopefully not. Anyway, what do you think? Do you think Paramount's just playing pretend and going along to get along in a way so that they can get their deal done? Do you think Skydance is holding, well, their own version of the sword of Damocles over their neck? Do you think the Trump administration will actually let this happen under all of these circumstances, including an apology and probably a hefty financial settlement? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. And as always, be sure to take care of yourself, take care of others, wash your hands because it's good hygiene. And until next time, see ya for real.